And I've lost a lot of people over the years, and so this is where I almost always meet them. But that first time was so amazing. I mean, that reunion with my mother, I cannot express how moving that was. And coming down and landing in this field is the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in your life. I mean, it was a normal field with grass, pine trees, flowers, a little brook. But the colors are inexpressibly vivid. Everything glows with this iridescent light. It's made of light. And the air sparkles with little tiny blinks of rainbow color. And you're embraced in this all around loving feeling.
Welcome. My name is Lee Chandler. I'd like to welcome everyone to another podcast with the Wise Old Soul. And as we know, the Wise Old Soul is really what's found inside each and every one of us. Today, I have an amazing guest on. I'm so excited about having Preston on. Preston is a podcaster. He has two different programs. He has one personal that you can find on YouTube under Preston Dennett. And he also has one with Dolly called Lightgate. And Preston is also a researcher. He's done work with the MUFON folks, which is the Mutual UFO Network. As well, he's an author, and he has just completed his 32nd book. And I am so excited to have Preston on with us. Preston, welcome to the Wise Old Soul.
Thank you, Lee. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited.
Hey, I'm excited to have you here. You know, Preston, you're just like having a brother on the other side. You're so relaxed. You're an average guy. You're just like you and me. We're just average people with some phenomenal and exciting experiences in life. And I know that things really started to change for you in about 1986. And maybe we can go back there and you can kind of tell me how all this started, and let's just see where it takes us.
Yeah, 1986. I can't believe it. That's like, gosh, I was, let's say, 21 years old and really skeptical of anything paranormal or supernatural or UFOs, life after death, ghosts, anything like that. I just didn't believe in it. I loved science. I loved science fiction, but no, I didn't believe that there were such things as UFOs or ghosts or out-of-body experiences. And that all changed rapidly. Really, it started on one day, November 17, 1986. I'll never forget it. I was there in the house at home with my family. I've got, 5 brothers and sisters, or did at that time, so have since passed on. But the news came on, and there was this pilot talking about his sighting of a UFO over Alaska. And I thought to myself, this pilot has lost his mind. He's hallucinating. He's misperceiving. I don't believe he actually saw a UFO. This was over Alaska, near Anchorage. And the news report was really brief, kind of joking about it, really tongue-in-cheek, and they moved on. But I remembered that my brother Mark, my older brother, had said he'd seen a UFO. And that was, 5 years earlier about. I was probably, 13 or 14 or so.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided, you know what? I'm going to ask Mark what he thinks of this pilot, because Mark thinks he saw a UFO. And that's how it all began for me, because it turned out my brother, he had seen this amazing metallic craft with colored lights, a dome on top. It was at treetop level. He chased it down the street with his 2 friends for like 15 minutes. I mean, this was a great sighting, and clearly not a helicopter or anything like that. So that's when I started asking other people, and I found out I had a lot of people within my group, my circle of family, friends, and coworkers who had encounters. And it branched out immediately into the paranormal because I learned how to interview people better and just kind of left it open. Not did you see a UFO, but have you had any unexplained experiences? So yeah, that's how it began.
And such a young age. Most people that I speak to, they too have had experiences. maybe not quite as dramatic as yours, but you'll talk to people, they'll have a little hint of, I feel like there's somebody behind me sometimes. I think I've seen things in the sky that I don't quite understand, but there's some of that. And I know for my age group, we just never talked about that through the 60s and into the 70s. It was just, no, you don't talk about it, and you just kind of bury it. Mm-hmm. And today it's being discussed a lot more. And I know that you've done a huge amount of research on individuals that have had sightings with intergalactic beings or extraterrestrials, people that have had conversations with them, that have been on ships. And I know in your personal podcast that you do on YouTube, you've researched a lot of stories and you share those with everybody. And I find that really fascinating. Is there a particular story or two that really kind of catapulted you into researching?
Yeah, I initially started, like I said, I was skeptical. So finding out that I knew people who were having these experiences, for me, wasn't good news, really, because I had to reevaluate everything. I was shocked, kind of scandalized, because these were people I loved and trusted, and they hadn't told me the whole truth. Like you said, this wasn't something that was talked about. Certainly not taught in schools, and it was occasionally on TV, but very rarely. But I think there was a couple of cases that really hit home for me, coming from family and friends and coworkers. I'd say the first that really struck me hard was when my sister-in-law, or was she my sister-in-law at that point? She may have just been my brother's girlfriend. But at any rate, she said, she had described this UFO sighting, and she ended up having a lot of other paranormal experiences. But a few months into all this, she's like, I did see something else which you might be interested in. And by then I picked up all these books on UFOs and ETs and, missing time and this sort of thing. There weren't a whole lot out there, but what I could find, I got. And my sister-in-law described how one evening when she was in college, this is late 1970s, in the summer months, she lived in Van Nuys, California at the time, and was walking down the street at night to retrieve a abandoned grocery cart. She saw it on the side of the street there near her home and wanted to pick it up. So she went walking out with her dog, Sarah, and was taking this shopping cart back to her home. And as she's doing it, she has to pass by this elementary school, Stagg Street Elementary School, it's called. And as she's walking down the sidewalk right next to this school, there's a huge floodlight right in front of the courtyard there. This is late at night, 11 midnight. She saw what she thought were two children standing out there right under this spotlight, under the floodlights. And she thought to herself, well, that's odd for kids that age to be out this late, because they were short, like 4 feet tall. And as she's looking at them, she realized they looked kind of strange. First of all, they were face to face to each other, almost close enough to be kissing. They weren't. And they were wearing these green jumpsuits. And as she looked at them and got closer, she saw that they appeared to be bald. And so that caught her eye. And so she's walking up right next to them, about 10 feet away, and staring at them, trying to figure out what she's seeing, when these two guys swiveled, almost, she says, as if they were levitating an inch or two off the ground, and looked right at her. And she says it was like being woken up when you're awake, because they weren't human. And she ended up describing what are typical grays, what we now know as grays. Very short humanoids with enormous kind of pear-shaped heads, large, dark wraparound eyes, very small nose and mouth, no visible ears, a tight green jumpsuit with a mandarin collar. She's an artist, so she's got a great eye for detail. She's practically got, what do you call it, a photographic memory. So she's going down this list of details. And as she's describing this, I'm like, I know what she's going to say, because this sounds like the grays I've been reading about. She never heard of grays. She did not know anything about any of this. So that really hit me hard. I'm like, you saw gray aliens. And she's like, what? What are you talking about? I'm like, that's what it sounds like to me. So that was, I think, the case that really got me to join MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and become a field investigator, start interviewing people officially, recording their interviews, becoming really serious about this, buying every magazine, every journal, every book, going to conventions. And I mean, it snowballed very quickly from there. It pretty much took over my life in a matter of a year or two.
Wow. Well, when you start having credible witnesses that you love and trust, it does shift you in a pretty significant way rather quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah, that was the thing. I knew she wasn't lying. I knew she wasn't misperceiving. It couldn't possibly be a hallucination. She didn't do drugs. So,
Right.
and that's what J. Allen Hynek, who, if you're in this field for any length of time, he's the astronomical consultant for Project Blue Book. He had this thing he called what does he call it? The escalation of theory. People go through all these things to try to explain what this could be. She thought it was children in masks, but it wasn't near Halloween. When someone sees a UFO, they're like, is that a helicopter? Is that a shooting star? Is this a satellite? What? You start looking for explanations, and there was none. So yeah, that was the case that really, I'm like, okay, now I know this is, well, I didn't know, I believed at that point. I think true knowledge only really comes from personal experience. And eventually I would have some of my own encounters. But that's when I really kind of knew there was something going on here.
Interesting. So you have had your own encounters. Would you like to share anything that you've experienced?
Yeah, sure. I didn't talk about my own stuff for years and years because I was really just focused on other people. But it wasn't long, well, somewhat long, I would say. I started to see some unexplained lights at night because I was out there looking. I wanted to see something because all these people were talking about this. And I'm like, well, I know that area. I've been there. And when I interviewed someone who was having a sighting, I'd be like, can I come over? Or, can I camp out in your yard? If you don't mind, I'd really like to see if I can have my own sighting. And I wasn't successful really other than unexplained lights until, I started to have some encounters. I'd say the first really major one was around 5 years into all of this, 1992, late July. I'll never forget it, actually. I was driving home from my brother Mark's house, the guy who'd seen a UFO. He and his wife were really helping me through all of this. I was in the middle of investigating this wave of sightings over Topanga Canyon, where I grew up. And it was a lot to deal with. I mean, I'd called the police, gave them my number. They were referring me cases. I was interviewing so many people who were having encounters. And it got late on that late July evening. And I thought, you know what? I've got to work tomorrow. I've got to go home. I'm going to see you guys later. It was approaching midnight. This was in Woodland Hills, a pretty dense suburb of Southern California, right outside of LA. So I got in my little car and I'm driving down their street, which is this tiny little street that's practically one lane. Golondrina, it's called. And there's this little hairpin corner right before you hit the more major street, Canoga. And I was going around that hairpin corner, which is steep and very tight. And you can't do it any faster than 5 miles an hour or so, probably slower. But I just come around that corner and I saw something caught my eye. And my first thought was it's a bird because it was way up there and swooping down, but it was glowing. So I looked up and it's this ball of light coming towards me. I thought, well, that must be a firecracker. But it wasn't. I'm thinking firecracker because it was late July. And this ball of light, which was about the size of a golf ball or so, a little larger, came right down and it was right in front of my windshield, about as far away as I am from my computer. I mean, 2 feet away at best, right over the hood of my car. And it stopped. And it was looking at me. I mean, I got a real sense of intelligence to this thing. It was a little ball of light, not a UFO with portholes or anything. but it was something unexplained. And it went back and forth, two times, 2.5 times, stopped again, looked right at me. I mean, I'm gripping my steering wheel at this point, thinking, oh my gosh, what is this? And this darn thing scooted forward, it dipped down, it almost touched the road, and it went straight up. And the last thing I remember is kind of looking up and watching it go straight up and into outer space, I guess. I mean, it disappeared. And that's all I remember. And I'd always tell people, well, that's my sighting, until someone asked me years later, well, what happened next? No idea. And thinking back on it, I would have turned around, told Mark and Christy, like, yes, but I just saw this thing. And I didn't do that. I don't remember driving home. In fact, I forgot about the whole thing for about 4 or 5 months or so. And it just popped into my head one day. I'm like, oh my gosh, I saw this. So the point is, I think I had missing time. I really do. And that was the first of what ended up being a series of sightings over the years. Because when you associate with people who are having contact, that increases your chances of, having an experience yourself.
Interesting. And it's not uncommon to hear that people do have missing time when they experience this.
Yes. And that was something that took me a while to understand. Missing time is when someone has an encounter and suddenly they might find themselves in a different position, or the UFO that they were looking at is suddenly gone, or it's over here now. They're disoriented. There's a confusion about time. They get home and they realize, well, 2 hours have passed and I've only been gone for 15 minutes. So this is a red flag to researchers that there's more to the encounter than you remember. And a lot of people have used regressive hypnosis to recall what happened. Some just spontaneously remember, but often this is an indicator that you've been taken on board a craft, or certainly had a longer encounter than you remember. So
Right.
yeah, that's missing time. But yeah, I remember I interviewed this guy who I think had missing time, but it just slipped right by me and him. He was on Mulholland Highway overlooking the San Fernando Valley. This is in Topanga Canyon, with his girlfriend. And they had just pulled over to park. They were going to drink a 6-pack of beers, and had literally just opened the beer when this triangle of lights appeared. And they became very nervous because they felt like it was watching them, and they couldn't identify it. And the next thing they know, this thing is swooping down towards them. It's changing colors, like a rainbow. They said it was absolutely beautiful, but came zooming so close, it scared the daylights out of them. And the next thing they know, it's scooting away and they're driving off. And at that time, I was new to all of this and didn't really recognize or learn how to ask questions about missing time. But in hindsight, I think that they probably did have missing time, because they showed a lot of the markers of it. A very strong emotional reaction. They said there was a shift, and a disorientation, and a real confusion about time. So yeah, I think they probably had missing time. It can be very almost seamless.
Wow. I have an experience that I don't really talk about. And so I'm going to share this with you just
All right.
for the sake of sharing it. I was up in New York, and it was out at a friend's place. And we were basically just having dinner. And right afterwards, I felt lethargic. I'd never felt so heavy in my life. And at the time, I was dating a girl, and she was up back home. And I gave her a call, and I remember trying to talk to her, and my words were slurring out of my body. And I could just feel myself that I just needed to climb into bed. And I literally climbed into bed, said goodbye, hung up the telephone, and I'm lying there, not able to literally move. And I had this sense of something there. And I didn't know what it was. It wasn't scary, but there was definitely a presence. And I'm lying there, and my eyes are closed. And all of a sudden I open my eyes, And I mean inches from my face, I see exactly what you described as the small gray. And I'm like, wow. And that's it. And that was, I remember absolutely nothing, no dreams, nothing waking up, right until the next morning. And I had a couple of friends down with me, and they said, Lee, they said, we watched you float through the wall. I'm like, excuse
Kidding.
me? And
Wow.
and they had experiences with two grays that they referred to as EB and CB back in Calgary, Alberta, in Canada. And they were down with me in New York. And I don't know, there was no reason not to believe them. They were credible people. They weren't the type that would just spin stories, I don't think. But it definitely takes my mind and stretches it, Preston, because
I can
I have
imagine.
no idea whatever happened beyond that. And so when you talk about missing time, I remember going to sleep and I remember waking up, and I slept for 10 hours. And I'm an 8-hour, 7-hour sleeper at best. So different things happen, I guess, to different people. And in that particular area, we witnessed a UFO before. Lots of people did. What came of it, I have no idea. But that
Some
missing
of those
time thing.
details, some of those details you describe, I'm like, wow, I've heard this before. Having an overpowering need to sleep. One lady told me, she's like, just had to go to sleep. I don't go to bed early. I'm a night owl. She went right to bed. She has a kid too. She's like, I have to watch my kid.
Right.
And they come right up to your face, these guys, and will stare right at you from inches away. Kind of, it's part of their communication with you, which is telepathic. I think that's what's going on. But man, oh man, that sounds like and for your friends to witness this, that's unusual because that doesn't happen a lot, but certainly lends corroboration and confirmation for you, which is awesome because people sometimes you think it's a dream,
It was just unreal, and the one thing that they said, Lee, we thought it was really humorous because as you levitated out the wall, we could see your pajamas were kind of hanging down off your body.
Like, wow.
Interesting.
At least you had pajamas, so
Isn't that the truth? Well, obviously you've grown in so many different ways, Preston, and I know that you've experienced out of body experiences, and obviously talked to numerous people. Talk to me a little bit about how that came about, how it developed, what happened, where'd you go, how'd you feel?
It's so interesting because it kind of came hand in hand with the UFO research and experiences, which at the time I thought was an extraordinary coincidence, synchronicity. Now I am not so sure that was what we would just call a coincidence, because having talked to so many people, this sort of does come hand in hand. And it actually kind of came a little bit first. And it was funny because, my family, who hadn't had experiences, was largely skeptical of UFOs, and they thought I'd lost my mind investigating UFOs. And then I started talking about out-of-body experiences, and they're like, what is wrong with you? I'm like, no, for real. This is happening to me. And how it all rolled out for me was actually really interesting. My mom passed away suddenly, tragically, at age 49 of a heart attack. And as you can imagine, that was hugely devastating. I was 19 years old, a young 19, if you know what I mean. I was just, not really out and about in the world, I guess. I don't know. But at any rate, it was about 2 weeks after she suddenly passed that we had her service. And my dad drove up in a car, and in the front seat, I saw my mom, full color apparition. And I know it was her because she has a very good posture. She has a certain way of sitting. She was very graceful. And My dad drove up right next to me. So I was about 5 feet away when she just pixelated away. And I thought, wow, I've lost my mind. No, I didn't even think spirit or ghost. That didn't even occur to me until years later, really. But now looking back, I think I probably did see her spirit. That was the first weird thing. But it was about a year after she passed when I started having what we would call pre-lucid or lucid dreams. Now, a lucid dream is when you wake up in the dream and you know you're dreaming, or it can be very realistic. And I kept having this really odd, what I thought were dreams, but I kind of knew were more than that, where my mom would come into my room and I would wake up. I thought I was awake. I would sit up in bed and I'd see Mom. I'd be like, Mom, you can't be here. You're dead. What is going on? And she would protest and say, no, you need to know I'm fine. And not really in so many words. She would just kind of look at me and smile and give me that impression. And then I would wake up for real. And I'm like, whoa, gosh, I thought I was awake. And that happened probably a dozen times to where I really came to a quandary. On one hand, I knew that there was no such thing as life after death. It doesn't happen. It's not real. On the other hand, I knew she was visiting me just by the quality of her presence. I knew it was her. And so I was at a crossroads and I could not reconcile these two belief systems. And that got me to investigate dreams. I started reading all the books I could on dreams. Eventually I had to throw most of them away. They were just not accurate because I was interviewing everyone about their own dreams at this point. I was going to figure out what was going on. And I found out about lucid dreaming. Tried so hard to wake up in the dream state and wasn't really successful at it until I picked up this book by Robert Monroe. Robert Monroe has written a series of 3 books. He's very popular about his own experiences with astral projection. And in them, he claims to have left his body after having, I think he had a heart attack and was using anesthesia and sleep learning and spontaneously started leaving his body. And was able to prove it in the scientific lab, by the way. But I was skeptical. It was a very interesting book, very compelling. And in the back of the book, he gave you exercises on how to do it. I thought, what? Okay, anyone can do this? Okay. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to just try. It sounds a little scary, but why not? If anyone can do this, I'd certainly love to know if there is life after death. I needed to know that my mom lived on or not. And so I did these exercises, which we can get into, and I've kind of refined them for myself, but it's basically meditation, relaxation, visualization, this sort of thing, affirmations. And I started doing these with a lot of discipline every night, meditating for an hour at a time before bed usually. And I immediately started having a lot more dream recall, a lot more pre-lucid dreams, weird, very vivid dreams. And then it all changed one day. Actually, I had gone into my room to just lay down. I was a little depressed. A lot was going on between, the UFOs, my mom passing, and all these weird dreamlike experiences. So I laid down on my stomach, on my bed, and suddenly felt very strong vibrations. Now, this is called the vibratory state, and it's good news. It means you're about to go out of your body. But when it happened, I didn't recognize it for that. I thought that I'd stuck my finger in the light socket next to my bed and was being electrocuted. That's what I thought. And what happened was the vibration increased to the point, and it got really loud, and all of a sudden I popped out of my body, out of control, flew across the room, crossed the hallway, and into the bathroom, the restroom. And I remember I was really disoriented, but I was totally 100% awake, even more awake in a weird way. And I grabbed the countertop and I looked in the mirror and there's nobody there. And I'm like, I'm doing it. I'm actually doing this. It's real. I am doing this. And I was so excited. And whenever you have strong emotion, it pulls you right back into your body. And that's exactly what happened. I floated up horizontally out of the room, across the hallway, back into my room, where I saw somebody in my room, a short little man. I couldn't quite make it out. It was blurry, but I floated over my body and back down and pop, woke up. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is real. I just had an out of body experience. It was maybe 30 seconds long. But man, oh man, that's when I knew there was life after death, that you can do this. And I doubled down and started doing these exercises and meditations with even more discipline, and started having out of body experiences at least once or twice a week, usually on weekends when I could sleep late. But yeah, the second time, same exact thing. Popped out, floated across into the bathroom, and came right back. Third time, I just woke up in the middle of the night, standing next to my bed, and I was very disoriented. I had vertigo, and I finally just shook my head. I'm like, what is going on? And I looked down at my bed, and I could see my body under the covers. I mean, I couldn't actually, I saw the shape of my body under the covers. And I thought, oh no, what have I done? I've died. I'm dead. And I got this cold chill, as you can imagine. I mean, I thought I had actually, truly, physically died. And I was so upset. And I immediately dived back into my body to try to get back in, and easily did. I filled it up like water filling up a cup, or gosh, I don't even know how to describe it. Like fitting into a mold, kind of. And you kind of wiggle and you find your place, and boom, I woke up. Almost forgot what had happened, but I remembered, and my emotions did a 180-degree turn and went from fear to absolute joy. And after that, I was doing it every weekend, usually for about maybe 5 or 10 seconds, because I would get so excited. I'd be like, I did it. And then I'd go whoosh right back in. And it took me almost a year, literally, to extend these experiences from a few seconds to 10 seconds to 20 to a minute to 2 minutes to 5 minutes, because I just couldn't control my emotion. A lot of people have this real strong fear. For me, it was excitement. The astral body is also called the desire body, or the emotional body. And when you start having these experiences, you'll see why, because your emotions come in at full force, like a tidal wave. But man, oh man, once I finally got to that point where I could control it, then I had to learn how to see, learn how to move, learn how to walk through walls. I mean, I had a whole learning curve to get through. And that's when all the fun really started.
My goodness. So when this all started to happen then, Preston, when it came to, 30 seconds or a minute, up to 5 minutes, and you were able to extend that, was that in real time? Because I also hear when we get in altered states, that time really almost disappears, is non-existent, and that
Yeah.
you leave and you're gone, and you can go and do numerous things, obviously. And it sounds like this is what you're able to do now, is when you leave the body you're astral projecting, you're probably going quite some distance sometimes and get so much done, yet maybe you're only gone for 5 minutes or 15 minutes. How does time relate to it all?
Yeah, well, there is definitely some interesting things that happen. I mean, initially, no, it was very much in real time, because I would just
Hmm.
pop out and I'd explore my room. And I got braver, and I'm going to walk through the door, and you could feel it. It's the most amazing thing, because you can feel it inside your body. You pop out. I would always close my eyes. It took me a long time to just open my eyes and do it, because it's different. It's everything looks a little bit glowy, and you're floating along. And I go out into the living room, and yeah, it was real time initially, because you're exploring what is essentially the physical world. Really, it's kind of an astral duplicate, but it's what we would think of pretty much as the third dimension.
Hmm.
Whereas if you go to what we would call the other side, where we
Hmm.
go when we die, the heavenly realms. I'm not really a religious guy, but I'll call them that for lack
Sure.
of a better description, because that's what they feel like and look like. I mean, it is beautiful. And that, yeah, when you go there, time is different. You can have a long, long experience and come right back. And it's the higher you go, that dimension wise, that really sort of accelerates or expands. And you can actually visit the past to a degree. I mean, you can't change it or anything, but you can go into your past and examine your past. Kind of like a near death experience where people have a life review. You can see past events. And this is so interesting because as soon as I started doing this and getting really good at it, almost, I won't say every time, but as often as not, I would come back with a memory of the future event, like a precognitive dream. And I ended up writing down like 100 of these things because I would have this vision or this dream, and it would come true the next day. Usually the next day, sometimes the day after that, or maybe even up to 3 days, but rarely more than that for me. So yeah, there's this weird element of time, and I don't even know how to describe it. The present moment almost expands for you so that you can look into the past and into the future. But no, generally speaking, I wouldn't have like a day or 3 days worth of experience and come back and it's just an hour. It was pretty much, for me, in real time. Though there were a few times where I felt like I did a lot more than, and I'd come right back. I'm like, wow, okay, I was only gone for like 15 minutes. But oh man, that first year or two was so amazing. I felt like I'd discovered a whole new world, and I couldn't get anyone to take me seriously. I proved it to myself that it was real because I thought, gosh, maybe I'm dreaming. I know I'm not. But I'm like, well, I need to find it because I would try to move objects and then wake up and see if I moved them. Couldn't do it. You're like a ghost. You can't do anything to affect the physical environment. I couldn't. I know people who can, but they've developed. But at one point, I thought, I got braver. I would fly outside of the house and around the house and, across the neighborhood and sometimes to friends' houses or family. And one day I'm flying around and I'm somewhat far from my condo. I had moved out at this point, and flew into the LA River. And I saw that this is purely cement, right? Just a cement concrete river. And I was at the base of it and I thought, well, this can't be real because there's earth here and it's growing with grass. And I saw a faded, sun-bleached 7-Up can. And it was all very vivid and very detailed. I thought, well, maybe I am making this up. I don't think so. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my body and I'm going to go over here. I'm going to take my car and I'm going to drive here, hike down, and look over the side of this river because I know exactly where it is. And so that's what I did. I flew back, floated down to my body, made a real effort to remember it because it's difficult sometimes. You can forget this really easily. But remembered it, wrote it down, had my coffee. I was so excited. I'm going to drive out there and I'm going to see if this is accurate, what I saw out of body. And of course it was. I drove there and I peered over the edge. And there was a few minor details in terms of the spacing of the litter, but it was exactly, almost precisely what I saw. And it was, I can't tell you that weird feeling you get when you see something out of body and then you see it physically. Then and there, I knew that this was real. But every effort I made to show myself to people, and I'd go to my family's house, I'm like, I'm here. I couldn't get them to see me. And I already knew their homes, by heart. So I couldn't really say, well, there's this on the desk and that, because I don't know, it just didn't work for me. But yeah, I finally got proof that I needed to know this is real. And initially, I just stayed in the physical world. And I would call out for my mom, because this was my real motive for doing this. I'd pop out of my body and say, Mom, where are you? Mom. And she would never come. Sometimes I'd pop out and walk into the living room. And there she was. And I'd be like, oh my God. And I'd run up and hug her. and just hold her hands and just bask in her presence. And she'd smile at me. Once I ran out, she was there, and I was going to run up and hug her, and she ran up and she lifted me up into the air. I'm like, whoa, I did not expect that. But initially, yeah, all my experiences were what on Earth, on the physical plane. And eventually I learned how to, go all the way. I went down to San Diego once, and I had a friend down there, and I went to his house, and I went farther and farther, and I've gotten better and better at that. But at some point, you get pulled to the other side, because that's the natural habitat of the astral body. That's where we come from. That's our true home. In a weird way, when people say astral projection, it's a misnomer, because what we're doing right now in our physical bodies, we're projecting down from our true home into our physical fleshy body. And astral projection is really more of a process of returning or expanding and becoming aware of your moving into your astral body. Yeah, the real fun is definitely on the other side, because that's where you can meet your deceased loved ones. You can go to healing temples, schools of learning, learn about your past lives, meet enlightened masters, go to the Akashic Library. I mean, oh my gosh, the things you can do, it's insane. If people had any idea how much fun it is, you would drop everything and start doing this. And you really, really would.
That's fascinating that you've been able to expand it further and further. You've obviously come across other people that have this ability as well. And what I am hearing is that everybody really has this ability. It's a matter of learning how to do it.
Exactly.
And being willing to. The one word that comes up in every single one of my podcasts so far is the word trust, is being able to trust that sense inside, to trust it's okay to do this. Meditation in different methods really has a tendency to relax and open that body up for infinite possibilities, I believe, as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's as safe as sleeping. It really is. Because, like you said, we are all doing this every night. The real trick is just remembering it.
Mm-hmm.
And all these dangers are way overblown. I bought every darn book I could find on this subject, because people talk about, oh, you could get possessed, you could get locked out of your body, ghosts are going to follow you back. And I mean, just these crazy fears that people talk about. I'm like, well, wait a second. I couldn't find a single example of any of this. It's as safe as sleeping. The only real danger that I could find is you get really into it. You get a little homesick. I mean, because it's so much fun and it will change your life. So it's a good idea to be prepared for that. But it's safe. And there's no danger of any of that, getting locked out or getting lost. Or I couldn't find any good examples of that whatsoever. I found the opposite. You can actually get physically healed. You can learn about your life path. Meeting your deceased loved ones, that alone is worth the price of admission. And the only real obstacle why everyone isn't doing this is because they don't think they can, they haven't heard about it, they're skeptical, or they have a lot of fear. Those are the only obstacles. That's the only thing that's stopping people from doing this. But I can't tell you how amazing it was the first time I really got to go to the other side. I'd popped out of my body and I ran into my living room. I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? Because you always want to have a plan, right? An intention. And that is one of the keys to really being successful at this. And I hadn't quite learned that yet. And I ran out into my living room, and there was a woman in there, this beautiful black woman who I recognized but didn't know. I didn't know her in real life. But I'm looking at her, and she's looking at me and smiling kind of mischievously with a twinkle in her eye. And I ran up to her. I'm like, well, who are you? And she didn't answer. She grabbed my shoulders, spun me around, and put her hand on my back and pushed me through the wall. And I popped out in another place. I don't know where I was, but it looked kind of like France, honestly, in this cafe. I flew upwards, and I'm flying around, and that's when I called for my mom. Like, Mom, come, I'm here, I'm waiting for you. Mom, where are you? And she appeared. Now, my mom, when she died, was 49, as I said, and had a lot of gray hair and some wrinkles, and was showing her age. But when she appeared to me then, she looked younger than I do. And I was losing my hair pretty early. In my late 20s, I was already having some pretty significant hair loss. All my hair comes back when I'm out of body. And I'm super buff. I used to be in really good shape. My body comes back, and I'm just, it's amazing how good you look. And she looked amazing. She had light brown hair. Whenever I knew her, her hair was black, but she looked like she was 20 years old. And she's smiling at me, and we hugged. I said, I love you. She said, I love you too. I've got something I want to show you. Not in words, it was all telepathy. And she grabbed me by the hand, and she manifested this car, which I thought was really interesting. And we sat inside of it, and boom, we went off to the other side. The car dissipated, and we're coming into a landing in this field, which is what I would call the heavenly realms, or the garden realms, where we all go when we die. I've now been there hundreds of times, and I've lost a lot of people over the years, and so this is where I almost always meet them. But that first time was so amazing. I mean, that reunion with my mother, I cannot express how moving that was. And coming down and landing in this field was the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in your life. I mean, it was a normal field with grass, pine trees, flowers, a little brook. But the colors are inexpressibly vivid. Everything glows with this iridescent light. It's made of light. And the air sparkles with little tiny blinks of rainbow color. And you're embraced in this all around loving feeling. And the green is like 100 times greener than any green here. And the flowers were alive. I just can't express it, how beautiful it was. It was shining beautiful, exquisite. And my mom grabs my hand, and we flew off over to the little brook there, the creek. And she walks into it and told me to come into the river. Like, I'm not doing that. It's like, yeah, come in here. You need to feel this. Again, just telepathy. So I walked into the water, and boy, it was the strangest feeling ever, because it felt really silky and really wet. But as soon as you pull your hand out, it's dry. And she grabbed some algae and she threw it at me and motioned me to throw it at her. I'm like, Mom, I'm not going to do that. And so she was always mischievous that way. She was a joker, and she threw it right into my face. I'm like, Mom. And so it was war, and we had this little, water fight. And it was very fun and very just relaxing, and got out, and I was perfectly clean. And it just went on from there. She's like, I've got something else I want to show you. And we went up another level. It was so weird, because there's these, when you get into the garden realms, there's a barrier. It's like the veil between the worlds, I guess. And I can't describe it in any other way other than you hit something and then you pop out to the other side. And you're in a higher vibration, kind of, a higher dimension. And it's much more quickened. And so we did that again. We hit another barrier, and we popped out, and there was this field of crystals, like quartz crystals or rose quartz, and big, huge boulders of it, and little rocks and sand, and this beautiful white sky. And I could see 360 degrees around me all at once, which I have to tell you was a little disorienting. And I was playing around with that, because I'm like, wow, I can see so well. I'm slightly nearsighted, but not there. And she pointed off into the distance, and I looked, and my vision zoomed forward, so I could see little grains of grass, or the quartz, about a mile away. And I was doing that. I'm playing with the zoom vision, and she's sitting on this giant rose quartz boulder, just kind of laughing at me. And then I'll try to make this quick. She points to the ground where there's fine crystals, and says, "Look." And I looked, and she turned it orange, bright orange, and she told me to eat it. I'm like, what? You want me to eat it? She's like, yes, eat it. And so I bent down, and I scooped some of this stuff up, and I put it in my mouth. And it was like those Pop Rocks candies kind of started exploding in my mouth with this orange flavor, which is so orangey. I mean, I'm now in love with orange juice. I have to have it because it tasted like orange juice, but much more so. And I'm like, wow, that was a cool trick. And we ended up going back. We sat on a bench. We talked for a while about life. And she wrote in the sky with clouds, I love you, I love you, I love you. At which point I started to feel this pressure on my body. And I turned around because I'm like, what the heck is that? There was this tunnel opening behind me. And I looked at it, I'm like, wow, it's like a vortex. And she basically said, it's your time, you have to go back. And I didn't want to, but I understood. And it sucked me right down several levels. And I had to stop and remember and meditate still in some dimension until I finally woke up. And that was the first time I went to the other side, but the first time of many, many times. I mean, I would go up there regularly and talk to her. My whole family was there. And they're all what we call subconscious astral. They did not remember this. And me and my mom would sit there. I'm like, they're all here. And she's like, well, yeah, but they don't remember. And I would argue with my brothers and sisters about this because they were fully conscious there. They knew what was going on. But when you come back here, they had no memory of it whatsoever. It's crazy.
Wonderful story. That the love you must have felt from your mother, just over the top.
To this day, I know our loved ones are watching over us. And when you do this, it will happen. I mean, you will see them. It's so much fun. I mean, I've lost my dad. I've lost 2 brothers. I've lost a nephew. I lost a best friend. I've seen every single one of these people. They're still there. We are never separated from them. It may feel like it, and death is certainly devastating, no matter what. But they are so much happier there. It's the most wonderful place you could ever imagine. Not that there aren't lower realms, which are miserable, because I ended up, what we call the hellish realms. Again, I'm not a religious guy. I never saw any lakes of fire or the devil or anything like that. But there are very low-level spirits out there who are earthbound, who need rescuing, and evil spirits even walking around. And I got more recently into just learning about that because I was curious. My MO has always been, I would read these books. I'm like, well, this person did it. Robert Monroe went to the moon. I want to try that. Marilyn Hughes talks about visiting the hellish realms. I'm like, well, if she can do it, so can I. So that's kind of been my MO. And I can't tell you the amazing experiences you can have. Oof. I start to ramble because I get so excited. I mean, there's just so much to
So the hellish realms, for example, Preston, are they still better than what we experience on the physical realms? Or is that still a much lower vibration than what we're at even? Because they're stuck in that astral plane or something, aren't they?
Yeah. And I don't pretend to fully understand it. But I can tell you that it's very similar to Earth on a bad day, but worse in a way, because on Earth, you're very lucid, right? You're there. You can understand what's going on. You have every opportunity in the world to improve your life situation. You've got people around you. You've got food. You can act upon it. Whereas on these lower hellish realms, people are obsessed with their misery, their form of misery. So, the first time I just kind of remote viewed it, I didn't really go there fully. And people won't even look at you. And if you go there and you try to get their attention, they will kind of avert their eyes. And they are lost in anger. They're lost in grief. They're lost in misery. They're lost in addiction. They're lost in hate. And it's very difficult to be around. These are the very lowest of the low realms, that as low as I dared to go. I once went pretty low down, and these spirits came around me, and they were nasty, and they had these demonic features that we would see in classic religious drawings. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I projected light and love, because I just keep very centered when I'm doing this. And that infuriated them. And they were gnarling their teeth and gnashing and clawing and trying to get at me. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to leave. This is not good. That was the lowest I've ever been. But there's a realm just above where earthbound souls are. And they're wandering the streets at night, and they can come right at you. And if they have any sense of awareness, you can rescue them. But often they'll just try to attack. And usually I just leave, I'm going back to my body. And there's a level above that where people are aware they're dead, but they're not in the garden realms. They're not in the heavenly high realms. It's a very urban setting with lots of buildings. And it's got levels to it, even here, because on the lowest level, it's dirty, it's nasty. It's like an awful dump of a place. Whereas it can be a little bit better, like a nice mall, like a mall setting, or a hotel, or a really nice hotel or pavilion. It all depends on, where that person is at. But I'll tell you one experience I had with that. Because I wanted to see it, and I went to this place. I'm like, gosh, all these people are in this, looks like a convention center, and they're sitting at tables. And I'm like, wow, this is really unusual. I think all these people are dead. And I walked up to this guy, this black guy. Some people just don't want to talk to you, and some are a little bit more open. I'm like, excuse me, can I ask you a question? Are you dead? He's like, well, yeah, of course I am. I'm like, okay, that's all I wanted to know. And I went to another guy. I'm like, how did you die? And are you dead? And he described it. I'm like, this is really interesting. All these people are dead. And I just couldn't wrap my head around it. So I came up to this little kid, and he seemed very open-minded. And I walked over, I'm like, can I ask you a stupid question? He's like, of course, sure. I said, are you dead? And he gave me this, like, are you an idiot? And he said, yes, of course. We all are. All of us are dead. I'm like, oh, okay. And so I was making my way back out, and I came upon this group of old ladies sitting at a table talking. And I walked up to them and I asked them the same stupid question, are you dead? And they looked at me, of course, yes, of course we are. And stupid me says, well, I'm not. And when I said that, there was 100 people around me, 50. And every single head turned and looked right at me with this expression, like, who the heck do you think you are? And what the heck are you doing here? And you don't belong here, kind of expression. And it creeped me out. And I immediately flew up and off I went. And these were people who didn't even realize you could fly. These were people who really were not fully there yet. And there's levels and levels of this. But yeah, I would say hell is like a mall on the other side, or one of the lower levels. But yeah, I've done that many, many, many times. And sometimes, when I see someone who's open to it, I can carry them to the other side. Because you will, if you get good at this, you will be recruited to start rescuing lost souls at some point, because it's a real problem.
And allowing them to cross over.
Yeah. During the COVID era, I popped over to the other side and I asked someone, I was in one of those settings again, and there was a lot of people. And I asked them, like, do you know what's going on with COVID? And they said, well, look around. Where do you think all these people came from? Like, oh my God. So a lot of people were dying. And I came upon this man who was kind of shining with light, and he's looking around. He's just, just trying to orient himself. Big, tall, black man. And he had this light about him. So I walked up to him. I'm like, hey, guy, how you doing? He's like, I'm pretty good. I'm okay. And I'm like, you don't have to be here. You can go to the higher realms. And he looked at me like, really? I'm like, yeah. In fact, if you want, I can take you there. He says, you can? I'm like, sure. It's no problem. I can do it for you right now if you want. He's like, really? I'm like, yeah, just take my hand. And he kind of looked at me sideways because I'm like, what? I don't want to hold your hand. You're another guy. I'm a guy. I'm like, listen, I'm just going to take you by the hand and we'll fly up. And you just follow me. Just trust me. He's like, okay. So I took his hand, and because this is how I get to the other side. I just fly straight up really fast with intention to get to the heavenly realms. Because once you're there, it's just, you know how to get there. I don't know how else to describe it other than that. And I took him by the hand and I pulled him up, and I started to see the colors change. Because there it's drab, it's gray, it's not as vivid as the garden realms or the heavenly realms. And instantly, these rainbow lights started coming around you. They're scintillating, and boom, you pop over the other side, and it's like the Wizard of Oz. When you go over the rainbow, and it's just like that, from black and white to absolute full living color. And off he went. I could never track them. Every time they dart away and they're gone. But yeah, I've done that a number of times, and it's always such a good feeling because you feel like you're doing your good deed for the day.
Wonderful. Well, Preston, I've heard you mention Robert Monroe a couple of times. Is this the same Robert Monroe that started the Monroe Institute and the HemiSync vibration
Yep,
and sounds?
that's him. I never went there because the Gateway program, I couldn't afford it and it was too far away, and I didn't have the time. I work full
Hmm.
time, or did at that time.
Right.
I did try the HemiSync tapes, which play these kind of alternating binaural beats, which make a weird humming kind of tonal vibration in your head. And I didn't like it. While it did mimic sort of that feeling you get of the vibrational state, it felt forced. And I
Hmm.
honestly wouldn't recommend it. I think it's a good idea to try it so you can get a feeling for it. But in my mind, it's kind of like forcing open a flower to bloom. You want to do this naturally. And I think it'll
Sure.
be a bit, I don't know, I shouldn't say that because other people have had great success with it. But I personally did not do it that way. It's funny though, I was sitting in my condo one day and Robert Monroe popped into my head. I'm like, oh no, I got this terrible feeling he died. And sure enough, I think it was a week later, he had just died. Oh my gosh, because when you do this, you get your psychic abilities go off the charts. It's amazing. After I would have an out of body experience, I'd go to work and I'd hear people thinking. And I'd turn around, like, what did you say? Like, I didn't say anything. Like, oh, I could have sworn I thought someone would be saying one thing and thinking another, and it becomes all garbled. And I'm like, I don't understand what you're trying to say. It's because they weren't being honest. And when someone's honest, they speak so clearly and true, and you're like, wow, oh my gosh. You can predict sometimes because you have precognition and clairvoyance, and all these amazing things happen. It's just the coolest thing ever. Oh, I can't tell you. That's, people say, what's the benefit of doing this? I'm like, it affects your waking life completely. It's like it's like, gosh, I would call it like waking lucidity, because you go into these dreams and you wake up in the dream, and then you come back and you start having dreams come true, or an event comes true that is going to come true, and you get that same feeling. All the sparkles come around, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's like going full circle. You become lucid while you're already awake. So the benefits are unbelievable. And I've collected like 20 or 30 firsthand accounts of people who've been healed of illness. Robert Monroe had a really bad hip problem. He healed it. It turned out it was due to a past life. Often they are. It's a past life trauma that's carried over. But Bruce Moen, he was cured of sarcoidosis. One guy was cured of muscular dystrophy. Another cut to her hand. Another heart problem. You name it. I've got case after case of people who were able to get healed as a result of an out-of-body experience. That alone should be worth trying it, because it's very much connected to past lives as well. If you do this, you're going to be drawn to a past life. And that is just so interesting when it happens. You're like, wow, oh my gosh. Oh, I cannot recommend this enough. I just can't.
Well, we spoke with Geraldine Orozco as well, and she talks about the DNA in us. That she's suggesting that only 3% of our DNA is really tied to our human physical being, and 97%, which has been referred to as junk DNA, is really the spiritual side. and which I find fascinating as well. And it sounds like your expansion is it's never ending right now. Like, to me, every time you leave and have an out of body experience, there's growth to it. And every time it's like you're a baby and you're going through adolescence right now. And things will just continue to get better, especially with the enthusiasm and the knowing that you have inside, that wise old soul in you truly understands that this is a natural state for us.
Yeah, I think everyone at some point will be doing this because it's, I think, a natural progression as you evolve along the spiritual path. We're all moving towards enlightenment at some point. This is not supernatural. This is not paranormal. This is what we're supposed to be doing. And we've had a lot of obstacles placed over us by, I think, forces on Earth that don't have our best interests in mind, because we're all fighting just to survive, really. But this is something we should all be doing. It's perfectly natural. It's absolutely safe. It's not hard to do. It's one of the easiest psychic talents, I think, to learn. It took me about a month or two to get this going, and I jumped right in. Anyone can do this. And yeah, you start to realize how unlimited we truly are, because the things we can do are almost infinite. I mean, we absolutely can do things like levitation and healing and remote viewing, astral projection, of course, but channeling and clairvoyance and telekinesis and teleportation even. I mean, there are people who have lived on Earth who can bilocate, physically manifest another body. And, Padre Pio did this. A bunch of the saints throughout history really developed these abilities to the point where they could do just about anything. So yeah, this is a natural human ability that we all can do. Anyone can do it.
Wow. Preston, we could continue talking on for hours right now, and obviously I would love the opportunity to talk to you again in the future, and I would like to see how we can really talk about this portion of our spiritual being and be able to dovetail it into the extraterrestrials, the ETs, and what's going on out there. There has to be a significant link for us to combine both of those together, and that they're happening simultaneously.
Yeah, well, meditation is absolutely key to all this, because you can initiate contact with ETs through meditation. And again, I don't think it's any coincidence at all that I started having my own experiences with ETs and investigating the subject when I started having this paranormal stuff going on. Because when I would talk to contactees, I would ask them, I'm like, okay, have you had any other experiences? I'm like, well, yeah, I've had ghostly experiences. I had a near-death experience, at which point I started developing mediumship, and then these ETs started coming into my life. Or sometimes people will be taken on board a craft and come back, and the next thing they know, they can do mediumship or clairvoyance or healing. There is absolutely a connection here, and they do go hand in hand. I think these are separate phenomena. I think a near-death experience is a near-death experience. And when someone sees a Bigfoot, that's what it is, or a ghost, or what have you. I don't conflate these all together. But one can sort of lead you on a pathway to exploring all of these things. And learning how to do astral projection can absolutely open you up to ET contact, and vice versa. There are many, many cases where people have even simply seen a UFO and then started having out-of-body experiences. But certainly being taken on board they will assist you with this. They speak telepathically, and when a person starts using that ability, it awakens the other psychic abilities that you have. So there's definitely a really sort of snowball effect when you enter any one of these areas. it can open up the doors to all the others, if that makes sense.
Sure. We're spiritual beings.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not all woo-woo scary. This is, I mean, even going out of body, we're not really doing that. We're just expanding ourself. We're moving into the greater portions of ourself. You're not really actually leaving your body in the sense that you're vacating it and you're not there. Part of you is still there. Because I'd be out of body and I knew what was going on in my room. I could see my room. And I would be way the heck out there. I mean, there was one time I'm like, gosh, I'm awake. I am awake in bed right now, and I am on the other side. I could open my eyes right now. And so what I did is I opened one eye, and I'm like, okay, oh my gosh, I can. And it was very disorienting, and it pulled me back. But I started to get a sense of what bilocation is. I remember one time I was meditating, and I'm like, okay, someone turned on the lights because I can see my whole room. And I opened my eyes. I'm like, oh, it's dark. No, okay. That was confusing. And I started to be just lying there and I could see everything. I thought, well, gosh, I must have thin eyelids. I must be able to see through my eyes. And I had to test that. I'm like, no, that's not what's happening here. Because you jump to these crazy conclusions to explain stuff. I'm like, no, my eyelids are normal. I cannot see through my eyelids. This is just opening up your inner vision. It's
Sure.
awesome. It's the most wonderful thing when this happens.
Well, Preston, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to speak with us here on The Wise Old Soul. What are some of the best ways that people can connect with you?
Yeah, I'm all over social media, and I'm pretty responsive. I try to be. I'm very busy. But you can connect with me on Facebook, certainly, on Instagram and Twitter. Facebook is probably best, or through my email, which you can get at my website, which is just my name. If you punch in my name, it should take you there. I do a podcast with Dolly Saffron, a contactee, called The Light Gate. I've got my own YouTube channel, which is UFOs and the Paranormal. You, again, just punch my name in, it should take you there. But I would love it if people contacted me, even if they just have a question or a comment or a story to share. Because I've taught workshops on how to do this. And I can send you some material that will get you right on your way to doing it. And it's so worth it. I mean, you can thank me later, but trust me, once you start doing this, you will be so much happier. It completely transformed my life. Anyone who suffers from insomnia or depression really should try this, because I think it will absolutely benefit you in so many ways.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And now you've got 32 books out. The last book, what's the title of that and where can people find it?
Ah, thank you. I have that. Well, here's one of them, Humanoids and High Strangeness. And this is the very latest one, Not From Here, Volume 5, literally just out since less than a week, really. So super excited about this. This is number 32. And yeah, I've got more books in the works, if you can believe it. I've got like 50 more books I want to write. I'm not sure if I'll get that far, but I'm going to give it my best try.
Wonderful. Well, again, Preston, thank you so much. We'll put some details in the notes here on the podcast where people can find your website, find you, send you some questions, get information. Again, thank you so much and have a blessed evening.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Lee Chandler. Have yourself a blessed day. It's been a pleasure.